Okay, thank you.
Hello. Nice to see you all. Um, so my presentation is called the ROBA hypothesis, but I came up with a cooler name, which is why don't apes use guns? Um, my goal in approaching Girard for the past few years has been to understand violence in some kind of more mechanical way. And that's what this presentation is about, because my specialty is in designing violence, doing violence. It's all fake, right? It's all fake, but in my head, it's real. And I research a lot of real violence. And so I've worked on God of War, Mortal Kombat, a bunch of things. I've got a company where we do motion capture. And so Girard was very appealing naturally to me because he has a theory on human origins beginning with violence, right? So his quote was, "Humanity results from sacrifice. We are thus the children of religion." So Girard's view was that violence is what makes us human. It's sort of like the human trait, because that's the thing that precedes religion, precedes sacrifice. So the way I understood his argument was that there's actually a zero before this, which is that there are chimpanzees that are aggressive, and they're some kind of primal chimpanzee horde, right? Okay, now mimetic desire within the brain evolves until apocalyptic violence is at such a point that it's just too dangerous to use it, right? Or that it results in a sacrifice, right? So we scapegoat the first human victim, and that's what essentially pushes us across the Rubicon into hominization, if that's accurate. I think that, I've read Girard years ago, but that's sort of my very blanket understanding of what his approach to history is. So I call this an endemic theory of origin because it's based in human relations. It's not an external thing that causes chimpanzees to transition, right? There are other endemic theories of origin that I think are interesting. Freud had one, which is the primal horde, which is the young men gang up on the father who's withholding the females because they all want to procreate. But then when they kill the father through the first patricide, they maintain the incest taboo, and this sort of creates kinship and it creates culture as we know it, right? Freud had a really interesting footnote about this, which was that you actually don't have to kill the father to create kinship and the incest taboo. That was a footnote. I thought that was really interesting. Eric Gans is kind of like that footnote. He has the originary hypothesis, which is sort of like a different take on Girard's theory, which is based in mimetic theory also, but it's the same kind of idea where proto-human chimps, whatnot, hominids were evolving mimetically to the point where, when they surrounded an animal carcass, violence just became too dangerous. It became apocalyptic. If somebody or everybody realized that we're all going to die if we fight over this thing. So the first sign was issued. So it was the aborted gesture of appropriation, right? So that's also a moment, and it's what creates the human condition. Now, there are, on the other side of the pond, the other side of the coin, ecological theories of origin. And these a lot of the time are like linguistic theories, and I won't go too much into these. Robin Dunbar, which is the group, and grooming, right? Terence Deacon, that we had some kind of symbolic communication that we realized was useful, and so we sort of evolved culture around that, and that's what developed language. Derek Bickerton is that we became an uncooperative group of scavengers. He was trying to search for the special problem, and that creates language. Richard Wrangham is that we evolved the ability to gossip. And then Noam Chomsky was that we have some kind of recursive universal grammar or a language acquisition device. Noam Chomsky's is the most Girardian, I think, of these, because it is it's kind of a moment when we become human. And he was sort of pilloried by the Darwinists for this. And that's an interesting case. He buckled, but whatever, we won't bother. So there are other ecological theories too, like the hand. Those are some interesting ones. Cooking, Richard Wrangham says, as we used fire, we evolved bigger brains and whatnot because we could eat more meat. Hunting is the killer ape theory for Raymond Dart. And of course, my favorite is aliens. In my country, L. Ron Hubbard created this very interesting religion where aliens come to Earth and inhabit human messed bodies, created Scientology, and Tom Cruise is a part of that. So that's its own theory of human origins. Everybody sort of has a cosmology, a cosmogony of human origins, right? And so my question is that if we evolved from animals, how did animal aggression become human apocalyptic violence? What is that step? What is that moment? And the second thing is, why aren't any animals using apocalyptic violence, and why have we not seen this happen? There is no recorded documentation of animals doing this. So my approach is very Girardian, which is that I think that the ecological theories are too difficult to trace human origins because there are just too many pieces, right? It's like, well, we gradually evolved some kind of part of our brain that was good at communicating. We gradually evolved like grammar. It's just too difficult. Nobody actually has any idea when that could have happened, how it could have happened, where. Nobody has any idea. It's just this very gradual thing. In fact, they seem sort of like averse to even positing a moment when it could happen. So I take the angle that violence is the clearest crossing of the Rubicon moment, if there is one. That would be the clearest moment because it's so specific. And so what I want to do is I want to put forward a mechanical theory of human violence so that we know if that transition happened, what exactly happened. And that maybe that then can dovetail into all of those other theories of origins. So provide that theory, show its shared roots with language. That's my task, is to show that it has the same mechanism underneath it as language, and then test it with all those theories of origin. Right? That's my goal. So it's important then, if we're going to talk about going from animal combat to human combat, we got to know what animal combat is. And I design animal combat for games sometimes. They'll have me be a bear, and so I'll fight like a bear. And so I've done a lot of animal combat research. But essentially, animal combat is designed to set a hierarchy. Right? And this is actually a very efficient way that animals do this. Now, the reason it works so well is because animal weapons and defenses are paired naturally within intraspecific combat. I'm not talking about predation. We're just talking about the relations between animals of the same species, right? So the buck's antlers are sort of designed for the hide is sort of designed for the antlers. The antlers are designed for themselves. You can actually look at antlers and anticipate what their movements are going to be, right? So if the antlers are going up, they're going to do this. If the antlers are more forward, then they're going to do charges, right? And it's very easy to anticipate then. It's very easy to anticipate, and I'm just going to jump ahead here. It's very easy to anticipate for animals what the other animal's object of combat is going to be. You actually know exactly what it is, because all you have to do is ask yourself, what is my weapon? That's his weapon. There's no question. It's automatic. It's sort of like automatically known. So as a result, animals fight often, and because they're designed for each other's weapons, they just don't die very often. It's like very rare for animals to get killed in combat. It happens. Of course it happens. And when animals back down, they do so willingly, and it's trusted. They are trusted when they back down, because there's no fear that they're going to like pick up some like gun or whatever. They like are going to have like cousins on the way. It just doesn't happen. No, combat is still brutal. Now, there are a lot of things about animal combat that is human, right? So they do have intraspecific murder. Brown rats, Conrad Lorenz talks about brown rats ganging up on an individual rat and killing it. Now, that was in an enclosure, right? But there was the example, there's also meerkats, they're well known to actually kill their own, and they mob as well. And then chimpanzees use, I would consider the way that they gang up on other chimpanzees, like in the Gombe chimpanzee war, this seems like mimesis, like a very low-level version of mimesis. And in fact, Giacomo Rizzolati's work, and he discovered mirror neurons, he was studying macaques. That's how he found mirror neurons, is in macaque monkeys. And he sort of like intuited that humans had those too, just like in a far richer sense, right? But none of this is causing hominization. That's my question. Why is it happening? So let's go to human combat now. So let's differentiate human combat. Now, we still need to set a hierarchy. We just naturally have to do this, right? Now, can we use combat for this? Is that safe? In terms of like raw combat outside of laws, right? Raw, just violence, death, murder, right? We have one distinguishing characteristic in combat that is different than animals, and it's the use of objects in combat. So human object-based combat, we don't know what the weapon is. We don't know what the object of combat is going to be. Not only do we not know what it's going to be before the fight, we don't know what it's going to be during the fight. We don't know if after the fight he's going to go get another one, or she. We just don't know. So because that wild card is there, we have no way to even plan our attack. So there's this natural kind of recursive back and forth. And yes, there's my little, we can't anticipate the weapons, and so that's why we escalate to extremes. because we can't know what the other weapon is, so we might as well escalate, right? And so not only that, but we're also anticipating what they're thinking. We're anticipating that they're anticipating that we're anticipating that. It's recursive process, right? We're sort of encapsulating their mind inside ours, right? We're desiring their desires, so to speak. But I think like on a more mechanical level, it's sort of like we're inundated by their intentions. And their intentions are inundated by us, and we know that. And it's this infinite loop that can drive you crazy, and at some point you have to act. So you act out in violence. So that's when this first stone gets cast, right? All right, now, there are some falsifications. Animals use objects, without a doubt. Right? Chimpanzees use objects. Apes, monkeys, they fish for termites. They use objects, right? I didn't put it up here. There's a bonobo, photo of a bonobo spearfishing. It's incredible, right? He must have picked it up from the fishermen or something. We don't know. Sea otters use rocks to smash clams. Crows will bend hooks to acquire food. And even this funny little guy here, there's Octopus marginatus. He picks up a shell in the event of predation, and he'll hold up a shell to protect himself. It's amazing, right? But none of this is in combat. It's only for predation and sustenance, right? So they don't use it in combat. It's almost like they're blocked from doing it. For some reason, when sea otters fight, they don't start picking up rocks and smashing each other's heads, even though they can do that with the shell. There's some kind of block. Now, chimpanzees kind of use objects in combat, but not quite. They're not quite there. If we were to imagine that there's a Rubicon to be crossed, we would imagine that they're standing at the beginning of the bridge, and like they're holding up objects in anticipation of combat. But when it comes to actually using it, they kind of give it up. It's also hard to hold a stick because they don't have opposable thumbs. They can't do the 3-jaw chuck or the 5-jaw chuck with a rock. It's just not very useful. Not only that, but they can't even anticipate other chimpanzees bringing objects to combat. If they did, they would bring them all the time. Chimpanzees are very smart. They have theory of mind to like 4 layers. That's according to Dunbar. Dunbar says they have theory of mind up to 4 layers. So they can anticipate that he's anticipating that you're anticipating. Like they hide things and trick other chimpanzees, right? Very smart. But again, they're blocked from using objects in combat. Also, their object usage is non-lethal. So it just kind of like doesn't matter. If you see a chimpanzee holding a stick, yeah, it doesn't matter. You're going to fight that guy anyway, right? It's really to be bigger. It's for intimidation. It sort of bleeds into combat. So they're also interestingly unaware of their surroundings. Like this drives me nuts. Like he's on a cliff, and this is a 2-minute video. He stands on this cliff, and he doesn't get off it, and they don't push him off. It's unbelievable. Like they are ignorant of everything except the combat loop itself, right? So their object usage is non-recursive. So it's like an instant, and that's it. They can't imagine another chimp using it, right? They can't sort of like imagine object usage outside of the combat loop. So recursion defined, this is the Wikipedia definition. It's the definition of a concept or a process depends on a simpler or previous version of itself. This is what we've been talking about, right? Theory of mind, that's a recursive process. With humans, it's also in language where if you bracket things like, did you buy the thing that your mother told me that you were talking about the other day when your father said, and you can go like 6 or 7 levels deep. And Daniel Dennett has this funny, line where you can go about 8 levels deep and you just kind of forget what the person's talking about, right? Interestingly, though, with recursion in language, we have words that can then offload all the memory space into a word and like pick up again and insert that word, right? So it's this very efficient memory process. So we don't actually have to have good memory to use language. We can also share those words, but I'll get to that later. So human violence, I describe it as recursive object-based aggression, right? And it's you also don't even need to know, like I said, you don't even need to see a weapon or an object coming. Goliath thought that David was going to bring a sword, right? They didn't even meet, and then they knew that there were weapons in place, right? They knew that this was going to be their combat loop, even before they even saw a weapon. So if we were to recap, animal combat is optimized for setting the hierarchy. Human combat, unfortunately, unoptimized for setting the hierarchy because it's apocalyptic. We kill each other. It's a very bad situation. We do not want to engage in violence. Definitely not outside of law, right? So other means have to be sought. So this is where I believe that the recursion in violence is the same recursion that's in language. And I think that all that's happening in violence and language is a transfer of recursion from one kind of thinking to another kind of thinking. So if you were to sort of think of human combat as the combination of object usage and combat, right, which is very specific to people, and that sort of builds this recursive loop between you and the other person, right? And the other person has this as well, and you know that he has it, and he knows that you have it, right? So that creates violence, right? That is what I would call the active state of recursion. Now, there's also a symbolic level of recursion, which is what language would be. And so what you can do is actually like bleed out violence into language and allow language to escalate. And that's the recursive process. That's the building of languages. That's parsing. That's all these great things that we do with language. But it's not just language. It's institutions, contracts, kinship, all these things that we, all of human culture, Girard's entire idea of human culture, religion, is where the sort of recursion within language is just building it forever. And it's shared, right? We're all allowed to share symbols so that we can keep building this thing. We're allowed to escalate to extremes within language. But at some point, if language breaks down, the recursion goes back into raw violence. And that's what we don't want. Sort of like the unoptimized strategy is to avoid leaking recursion into violence. And this is like a very sort of pseudoscientific, but I'm trying to find the thing that's under violence, right? So that we can understand then what is driving all of these theories of origin. Because if recursion is at the origin, then for Freud, recursion is what converts human combat into patricide. Because otherwise you just have chimpanzees that they're not going to make kinship because they kill their fathers. They don't create kinship. So recursion is needed in order to create that mimetic situation. That's that apocalyptic scenario. For Girard, recursion converts combat into human sacrifice, which produces religion and culture. Right? Because chimpanzees, when they sacrificed the chimpanzees in Gombe, it was definitely an all-on-one. But they didn't create religion, not that we know of. They're not carpentering the world, right? They're not using new forms of violence. And then for Gans, recursion converts combat into the first sign. Again, you're taking the potential of everybody going into apocalyptic combat and converting that into a sign. If you were to imagine that violence is this infinite depth, like a hole, like a black hole in human relations with its own hierarchies, right? If you can take that and encapsulate it into a word, that word now has infinite depth. Those words can now be placed side by side with their own hierarchies, and that might be what grammar is. So the ecological theories also would require recursion to create even the human dynamic that harmonizes. Without recursion, it's like none of this happens. So it's what makes us human, otherwise we're just chimps. And that's it. Thank you.
There will be time for questions. If anybody wants to, everybody can ask the question. Please. I was just a curious, because you called me about
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, guys. Because you talk about Rizzolatti and the research of Rizzolatti. I don't know if you found something with Professor Gianfranco Mormino about the difference between the social behavior of chimpanzee and bonobos. So I want to, because he found some difference in this. So I don't know if it could be useful for you to find this kind of difference or not, because you have this relationship with chimpanzee that is really interesting, and I don't know the bonobo that is it's really close to us, to the human society, could be useful for you.
Yeah, that's they say that bonobos are closer to us, right? And yeah, and I've heard this before, and they don't use recursive, they don't use ROBA, but they do have a sort of like more dynamic sex life because their genitals are different. But those stay the same. So the difference with all of animal combat and sex between that and human violence is that human violence is as a relationship is constantly changing. It changes in every moment, every relationship, and it's constantly being updated. And it's sort of like what would you say, crowdsourced. Like everybody sort of knows the latest update, right? Everybody knows that nukes are the thing, right? So we're not going to go and do certain things now because there's nukes. And we find that, when colonists take over, tribes of people, for example, the Australian frontier wars. When they introduced rifles into the frontier wars, the natives were just like, what are these long distance magic sticks that they're using? But within a day or two, they came up with new tactics. And some of them gave up and they realized, well, we can't beat these things. But then they learned they learned marksmanship. And then they combined that with horseback riding. And there were these Terminators, the Victorian, something, a mounted police. And they were like the best policemen because they were able to just take up gunpowder instantly. So like, it's extremely quick. It's like you learn a new language of violence, but instantly almost. Like you can learn violence incredibly quickly. And so that kind of updating is what makes humans so different from any animal.
Solid credits.
And this is the point. I don't know if him, because I never study like you this concept. If him is agree with you, like this big difference between the violence of animals and human. So, or just a suggestion. It's not your critical things.
No.
It's just that because him proved this, and
Girard didn't say it.
Yeah,
he didn't say what it was. He just sort of left it blank. He said humans are violent. He didn't. And he said there was escalation to extremes and battling to the end, but he never talked about the mechanism. And that was what was bothering. I was reading Battling to the End when I was making a movie one time, and I was trying to design an action scene. I was like, okay, I'm going to use escalation to extremes. And I was like, well, if these two guys are desiring each other's violence, why would they escalate? If he brings a knife, he would just bring a knife. It doesn't make sense. And actually, Rizzolatti's work is very useful here because when you look at Rizzolatti's work, he speaks much, and Rizzolatti was quoted by Girard when Girard was talking about mirror neurons. And Rizzolatti wrote Mirrors in the Brain in 2008, and he said that instead of us desiring, he had a much more mechanical definition, which is that we load the intents of the world around us.
Yep. Yeah. Are you familiar with the work of Niklas Luhmann?
No.
Okay. So he also talks about social order as the result of guessing what the other person is expecting. You expect that the other person expects a certain thing, and then and it's reciprocal. Yeah. But I have another question. How would you address a game or games in general, but a game like rock, paper, scissors in your? Yeah, how would you approach that?
Well, the game of rock, paper, scissors is bounded by linguistic rules. So you're not allowed to actually pull out a gun and shoot the guy, right? So you have these linguistic rules. In fact, the only way for you to have human aggression is within linguistic rules. So if we were to go back to the recursive sort of process here, the only way for us to have combat and aggression is it has to be within the bounds of recursive language. So even warfare today is supposed to be within the boundaries of recursive language. Right? We have Geneva Conventions, we have international law. Now, sometimes people break these, right? And then again, it ends up going into there, like what Putin's doing, right? And so now what has to happen is we have to sort of reformulate this so that we can get that recursion out of there, rebound it within language. But it's the same stuff. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So like, which one came first? I don't know if we can possibly know that. I think there might be places where language came before violence, and there are places maybe where violence came before language. I don't know. See, I don't know if you can actually have like a historical theory of recursion, because you can also say that kinship came first. So, but in terms of the game theory with trying to figure out the intentions of other people, I think the value of Rizzolatti's work was that intents are the entire world. It's not just people. So a volcano, you anthropomorphize the intents of a volcano. And so the intent of a volcano, you see it smoldering. Okay, that's a signal. It intends to blow up. When you anthropomorphize that, you see a chief. What do you give to a chief? You give him a chicken. You throw the chicken in the volcano, and then it stops. It doesn't erupt, right? Well, it doesn't work like that, but that's what they think. So it's very natural to anthropomorphize everything because that's all we can do. That's how we intent load each other, right? And that's actually very valuable with people. It just kind of breaks down in the outside world. And that's how you get a bunch of magic and superstition. But that stuff kind of gets weeded out over time, hopefully. But with people, it's like we have not figured out a great solution to this, except language. There's like the only way out is like the recursive process of language and culture and religion.
Okay. Come say.
Obviously, we have seen that non-human animals use objects. Okay. But they always use object in a certain context. Fishing, hunting. They are even able to move the context or to move the same object in different contexts. But you've said that they are not able to move this object within one very specific context, the fight. Why? What's happening with that specific context?
So combat is the interdivisible relationship, right? Now, outside of the interdivisible relationship, it seems as though they're like very capable of doing amazing things. And then within the interdivisible, it's like it's a different process. And with humans, it's like it's almost like we broke that.
Yeah. Isn't it just like an instinctual?
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's what being. It seems as though that's what being fallen means. That's what I would say the fallenness means, is that we no longer have a break on interdivisible relations anymore. There's no break on it. We have.
Would it be a biological break or something like that?
I have no idea. I mean, like, look, I mean, physiologically, we have this thing. I don't know if this is the thing, the thong, but this allows you to strangle somebody to death. Again, sorry, I think very violently because I'm a student. It's all fake. Chimpanzees can't use this. They can't, and they don't choke each other to death. There's something anatomically, neurologically, that's probably all the same stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if recursion doesn't just occur in the brain. Like when I made that graph, it's just a proxy for what's really going on. It seems as though the human body is built for recursion head to toe, or thumb to brain. And this is like this, it's this amazing sort of like apex of like what's possible with animals that animals have not done. And yet we now have it. And like is that the end? Because outside of recursion, what else is there, right? So we can talk all day about, aliens are able to go to the fourth dimension. It's like, yeah, but we can write formulas about the fourth dimension. We make games on the fourth dimension. We're already there. So recursion allows you to think of like everything.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'd like to introduce Emanuel Muroni of the University of Cagliari from the Department of Environmental, Civil Engineering and Architecture, who will give a lecture on unveiling mimetic behavior in sustainable urban regeneration processes. Okay. Thank you.
I don't know if
is it?
No. I think it's just So thank you very much, Dr. Lembo. And today I would like to take this opportunity to discuss our project addressing key issues, including developing an operational proposal for empirical research to measure mimetic behavior in sustainable urban regeneration processes. The reflection in this contribution was developed with the two individuals featured on the cover of this presentation. Discussion with Paul Dumichel during his recent visit to Cagliari in November 2023 also contributed to the development of this contribution. It is also pertinent to note that this study is supported by funding from the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, and this now is in the middle of its development cycle. This is to clarify that this is a work in progress. My goal here is to stimulate discussion and, in line with the heuristic power of mimetic theory, to prompt additional consideration that could arise following the exploration and analysis of the topics covered. The slide offers the overview of the structure and the outline of this presentation. I will start by providing some background information on the motivation and context in which it fits the study, followed by a description of the specific objective and the problem on the field. I will present the case study, which will serve to introduce the methodology employed in this recent project. Then I will discuss how the study contributes to the field before presenting some concluding remarks and their implications. Finally, I will outline future research prospects. This contribution actually represents a first step on our ongoing interdisciplinary research trajectory, which is dedicated to the theoretical and operational integration of the Girardian perspective in the field of urban study, political geography, and urbanism. The initial proposal of this hypothesis was presented already at the COV&R in Eastbrook in 2019. Since that time, we have continued to refine the theoretical framework and assumption at the basis of our research program. Indeed, on several occasions, we had the opportunity to demonstrate the potential implication and the explanatory power of Girardian hypothesis on mimetic desire and these microphysis in shaping.
Thanks.
In shaping the social production of space. By observing urban dynamics and pieces of evidence in everyday life, we noted numerous instances where individuals' desire to appropriate public space led to disputes and conflicts concerning its value. Just see the way in which owners of bars and restaurants attempt to occupy every last fragment of squares by placing tables on it. In this instance, public space is not just a stage for the intricate interaction and disputes between social actors. Instead, urban spaces appear as one of the three vertices in the Girardian elementary triangle of mediation of desire. This evidence led us to reflect on the possibility of considering urban spaces as mimetic objects. Let's consider a project proposal aimed at the recovery or regeneration of urban object, an artifact, land, site, area, piazza, etc. Any transformative action or intention aims to give the urban object new essential and distinctive characteristics. Minimal, low-cost, also non-permanent design proposal can potentially perturb the pre-existing balance, resulting in a redistribution of values in the area involved. During our research, we demonstrated that mimetic theory is an effective tool to clarify behavioral oscillation, genesis of social tensions, and appropriation drives towards urban objects. Girardian perspective provides valuable insights that improve our understanding of urban phenomena of spatial re-evaluation, particularly when economic, affective, identity, or aesthetic reasons are not immediately evident. Until now, our approach to demonstrating the effectiveness of applying mimetic theory to analyze a specific urban dynamics has involved reanalyzing a published case study in order to reveal a reconfigured interpretation of a specific urban phenomenon. While this method has proven effective in demonstrating the value of the explicative model introduced by Girard, we have continued to explore the potential of developing a framework for measuring mimesis through direct field research. Building on previous results, we create an ideal condition for testing our operational proposal to measure the evolutionary trajectory of mimetic behavior in a urban regeneration processes. The objective is to create a clear and practical methodological framework that provides step-by-step guidance on how to recreate this condition and subsequently replicate the method in other contexts. During the development of this operational proposal for empirical investigation, we faced numerous challenges. First, field research attempts are rare, probably because, as Paolo Antonello notes, there was no need to do field work for Girard. The available literature generally supports this view, apart from some notable exceptions, such as Simon Simons and his book King of Disaster. Nevertheless, Simons himself recognized the significant methodological effort involved. In addition, empirical investigations are challenging, particularly data collection via interviews or questionnaires. According to Dumichel, also because of the meconnaissance, this method do not allow us to fully capture the reciprocity of human interaction related to desire. It should be noted that as an abstract and ideal model, mimetic theory has the advantage of simplifying reality, but also the disadvantage of making it difficult to identify the phenomena where public space reevaluation could have mimetic origins. Therefore, it is important to consider the potential for spatial reevaluation to take place at different time scales, spanning short to long periods. This is introduced an element of risk which could potentially render every effort inefficient. Our proposal is designed to address these challenges, identify and mitigate the associated issues. I would like to show you a case study to provide a more detailed illustration of our proposal. The case study outlines the application of Unicasa project in urban regeneration, recently focused on the regeneration of open spaces within the University of Cagliari, its promoter. Actually, the concept Unicasa was developed by combining the Unicasa acronym, which stands for University of Cagliari, with the initials of the words spazi and aperti, open spaces. The Unicasa project involved students and teachers in designing and realizing self-construction projects in order to regenerate open spaces within different campuses. The project is based on the doing by learning principle, which is defined by the fact then that an object is left in the space and generates evident implication. Through multidisciplinary workshop, the students will be guided in reimagining open spaces and proceeding directly with self-construction using modular, recyclable, and transportable materials, such as wood bases, panels, wooden molars, and so on. The main objective of the project is to gradually transform the universe into a new home for the students. The intervention is based on a coordinated and systemic approach, producing a series of devices in open spaces that can be used in a variety of ways and that serve as hubs for meeting and aggregation. The Unicasa project has been a great success in terms of the training provided to students involved, as well as in terms of urban regeneration of various locations on and around the university campus involved. The Unicasa project has received financial support to expand and plan activities for the next 2 years, with 6 interventions already scheduled across different locations. Despite the project official start date of 2023, experimental phases actually began in 2015. This has allowed the project to gain invaluable insights that have informed the current study on enhancing the operative proposal for detecting mimetic behaviors in this kind of regeneration processes. Before presenting the operational proposal for empirical investigation that we are adopting in this year with the second episode of Unicasa, I would like to provide a brief overview of the experience gained from the previous episode of Unicasa project, which took place last year. The intervention engaged a different team of students, including those familiar and unfamiliar with the campus spaces involved. In just 7 days, some neglected areas of the campus were completely transformed through self-construction practice, prompting both support and opposition from students, teachers, and administrative staff of the campus that host the practice. The Unicasa intervention had the effect to influencing perception and identities associated with the campus spaces, as well as the internal community dynamics. The open spaces affected by the Unicasa project become quickly an object contested between 2 parties, the group of opponents and the Unicasa team, also known as the group of Space Force, the name that we use to identify those actively involved in the construction. The case study shows an ambiguous redistribution of preferences expressed by a group of students toward the open spaces affected by the intervention. Our interpretation of the dynamic was that the transformative gestures, such as painting open spaces on campus, operate by the Space Force team like an arm extended toward the object, was perceived by the group of opponents as a clear sign of appropriation. This led us to consider the possibility that the activity of transforming the space mimetically ignited in the opponents the desire to gain possession of the open spaces involved, independently of the purpose of the Unicasa project. The main aim of the opponents may have been to take the object out of the hands of the Space 14. Subtraction is the key. This is why Girard describes this phenomenon as a process of mimetic appropriation. It is not really about the disputed object. It is not merely related to the availability of the object. It is about the mimetic relationship with the adversary and the double bind of tension you fall into. What at first glance we may recognize as a desire to have, Girard argues is actually the even more powerful desire to be the adversary, the desire to replace the other, the metaphysical desire. On the other hand, it is not difficult to imagine how the Space Force team appears happy and prestigious with the object in their hands. In conclusion, during this escalation of rivalry, the open spaces involved in Unicasa project acquired value for both parties. The value attributed by a social actor is not simply a matter of market value or the instrumental rule of land in conventional political functions. It is precisely in the context of a dispute that the reciprocal and fallacious attribution of value occurs. If previously it was a neglected and residual space in the stage of contention, it becomes unique and therefore exclusive for both parties involved in the dispute. In these terms, the open spaces of campus become the medium that unites and strengthens the two groups. This alternative approach to reading dynamics is providing insights into the underlying violent mechanism of conflict. This violence can become a fundamental factor in determining the value of the disputed object, even in terms of social production of space, as Henri Lefebvre intended. As we can see in this picture, the impact of this dynamic extends beyond mere presence, a settlement or use. Rather, it is about attachment to place, as described by other colors. The interpretation I presented could be classified as merely interesting and original, but not valid. No method was in place to collect the data to support the hypothesis. The solid construction and regeneration process, which was already composed and structured in a unique step that include the stage of thinking and planning and the stage of action, has been further developed to include two additional phases. These phases will allow us to register the entire evaluation of dynamic of the second episode of the Unicasa project, which is still ongoing. We have integrated the ex-ante and the ex-post phases into the existing framework of the Unicasa project. The ex-ante phase, students' records and the pre-intervention condition, registering thoughts and consideration of the spaces before the transformation. The during phase, which will be further implemented, allow us to record how external practice, that are the individual not directly involved in the Unicasa project, interact with the disruptive events and the working space for team. The third phase is designed to monitor and observe the manifestation of the phenomenon with a view to identify any eventual changes in terms of projection of interest to the spaces involved by the practice. An empirical investigation, including direct field research, adopts a longitudinal approach to record not a frame, but the entire evolution of the dynamic. The three phases of the data collection, pre, during, and post-regeneration, allow us to track changes in sentiment, behaviors, preferences, and judgment about the space involved. It is a participative observation that involves the student and teachers actively participating in Unicasa project.
Oh, sorry.
The data collection tools that we are adopting combine quantitative and qualitative methods. Quantitative tools like questionnaires ensure reliability and representative sampling. To address the mechanoscience issue, we don't have time to directly collect the declared information, but rather work on the design of indirect question for both questionnaires and interviews, uncovering nuanced information about mimetic behaviors. Recognizing the limitation of questionnaires and interviews alone, we also use qualitative methods like focus group discussion to explore the relational dimension. To gain more comprehensive understanding, we also collect data on the direct relationship between individuals and their environment. This is achieved through an innovative approach, namely experiential works. In addition, the data collection will encompass not only individual thoughts, but also observational data. The collection of observational data on different days and times allow us to get further insights in enhance our understanding of the phenomena under consideration. Each tool is applied in each of the three phases described above. Triangulating data collection methods and the data itself allows for more accurate verification and provides a comprehensive understanding of the factors that contribute to the phenomenon manifestation. The articulation of this approach provides fruitful outcomes in understanding the relational and inter-individual nature of preference formation. Some conclusive considerations are presented in the slides. As previously noted, I'm not yet in a position to provide a detailed assessment about the efficacy of the method in measuring mimetic behavior. We have just completed the recording of the ex-ante phase and are now in the initial stage of the during phase, which involves thinking and planning. We are currently in the middle of the process presented today. Nevertheless, I still wanted to take this opportunity to introduce you the potential benefits of the Unicasa project, which is extended beyond the training of students and the intrinsic value of the sustainable regeneration proposal. That is the opportunity to measure mimetic behavior through a replicable model that allows us to test an innovative methodological protocol in different occasions and settings. The outcomes of our pilot test have prompted further questions and investigation, which we are in the process of conducting. More could be said and learned about how to identify the weight of the influence of the mimetic factor. In this perspective, we are exploring and testing innovative techniques and tools for detecting and isolating the variable of mimetic behavior for models that will be useful for a project related to promoting sustainable urban mobility. Taking inspiration from a mimesis semiotics method introduced in 2022 in the line of the social conformity experiment, we are considering the introduction of two individuals who could act as models to better trace the relationship of subject-model-object in the focus group discussion. However, our primary focus is on integrating Unicasa project to regenerate some ruins and abandoned archaeological sites in Sardinia. This represents a significant opportunity for us to provide valuable insights into the measurement and evaluation of mimetic behavior also in other urban settings. And that's all. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, that's yeah.
Okay, hello everyone. Sorry once again, I was in room 13 thinking that it was 12 until now. So I'm sorry for myself for making this your talk because it seemed very cool. But thank you for being here. My name is Enrique, and I have kind of my feet in a bunch of different places all at once. So I'm a student. I studied math, I studied theology, but I've also worked about 5 years at different research institutions working with psychedelics for people with depression, suicidal ideation, anxiety disorders, and PTSD and things of that sort. So I have a lot of very interesting anecdotes, and I have a side interest in Girard that's kind of been a passion of mine. And so I want to see some kind of links that I think overlap with psychedelics and Girard. In fact, I think that there's a lot, but I'm going to touch upon at least one. Okay. The experience started with a startlingly abrupt explosion of color and pattern, swimming and vibrating through space. It was astounding. I will never forget the beauty of it. Hundreds of tiny objects appeared in a miniature display of organic forms. I was hurled forward at a great speed into open space with the sound of a great whoosh. I was propelled forward upon a three-dimensional grid-like structure that was exponentially forming beneath me. The structure seemed to assemble in response to the music. A slowly moving gyre of a Fibonacci-like pattern of color and sound pulled my attention ever more deeply into its expanding depths as it regenerated itself more and more deeply. A voice that seemed to belong to a gentle light appeared and said, "That is beautiful, but keep moving on. There is more and more." The experience of other worlds, enormous, well-ordered, populated with entities and voices that communicate, are commonplace under high doses of psychedelics. What was just read was an account of a participant in a psychedelic research study conducted at Johns Hopkins. And though it is remarkable, it is similar to thousands of participants reporting from the major research institutions of the US, including Yale, Stanford, and New York University, that are participating in what is being called the psychedelic renaissance. I begin with this account because one of the central claims of the psychedelic renaissance is that there is an inherent religious or spiritual dimension to the psychedelic experience, which is primarily what allows for the transformation of self that participants consistently report, in turn relieving them of their treatment-resistant depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, addictions of all sorts, obsessive-compulsive disorders, anxiety disorders, anorexia, a host of other mental disorders as well. The healing that participants experience from these ailments are at unprecedented rates in psychiatric research, and the number of ailments for which they are effective is expanding every year. A kind of conversion experience seems to take place, where the participant understands the true nature of himself and the world in an entirely different context. This thus allows the participant to see their sufferings within the framework of a larger picture. By removing themselves from the narrow confines of their personal narrative, and thus seeing themselves as actors in a gigantic drama, the psychedelic experience offers the participants an understanding of the meaning of their suffering, and more specifically, that there is some kind of higher power or greater providential force, that's their reporting, that is at play in the order of the world, and that this force can be trusted. I hope that by giving this very brief account of psychedelics, the readers of Girard will pick up on a whole host of concepts that are central to the ongoing Renaissance and that intersect significantly with Girard's theories of anthropology and religion. In particular, there is here the question of the origin of religion, the nature of mythology, the transformative reality of the conversion experience, religious transcendence, the nature of madness, and of course, as any Girardian can appreciate, the experience of intuiting the end of the world. These are all incredible dimensions that are worthy of our explorations. What I would choose to focus on is a question that I find currently relevant to those interested in the psychedelic experience and to our current location in this colloquium. I would describe the vast range of human experience that psychedelics bring out, using the case of Mesoamerica at the time of conquistadores, and try to briefly explore any relevance it might have for our current paradigm of psychedelic research. Perhaps the most defining quality of the psychedelic experience is its elusiveness to being described. Like Borges's Aleph, the experience brought on by psychedelics seems to bring people to the point of the universe which contains all other points. Some of you might know firsthand. For those unfamiliar, the term psychedelic refers to a family of structurally similar compounds found throughout the life kingdom, notably in plants and mushrooms. These include psilocybin, found in magic mushrooms, LSD, which is a close cousin of LSA, which is found in morning glory seeds, and DMT, arguably the most mysterious, which is found all over the life kingdom, including the human body, for as yet unknown reasons. These molecules are structurally similar to serotonin and thus act on the perceptual mechanism of the nervous system, radically altering the user's experience of the world by providing novel neural connections and, interestingly enough, deactivating the areas of the brain formed in adulthood, which are most related to the concern of the self and survival. Now, there is vast archaeological data demonstrating that various psychedelic plants have been used for millennia by cultures from all around the world, including Spain, Siberia, China, Oceania, and definitely the Americas. These cultures use them for divining the future, finding lost objects, contacting the dead, healing illnesses, entering shamanic ecstasy, and aiding in the process of sacrifice. In our time, psychedelics have resurged as a promising clinical tool for the treatment of a wide swath of mental illnesses that are otherwise like a mythological hydra. The more we slash off each head, pouring money into antidepressant medications, talk therapy, and conventional psychiatry, the more depressed, suicidal, anxious, and traumatized our population seems to get. I personally have met dozens of people who have come to our research department seeking psychedelic intervention because they saw it as their last hope before suicide. And that is because they have heard of the testimonies of others, testimonies that I've seen with my own eyes in the clinical setting, of people that have fought depression and suicidal ideation for decades, only to have their symptoms relieved after having a radically transformative and bizarre mystical encounter under the influence of the psychedelic. Interestingly enough, Girard directly touches on the use of psychedelics at one point in his career, in ancient cultures and religious rituals, in his penultimate book, Sacrifice, from 2003, where he engages with the mythology of the Indian Vedic tradition. The Hindu god Soma, who at once was a plant psychedelic, used for ritualistic purposes in ancient India, though the plant still remains unknown. So I will quote Girard here briefly. Go. The disequilibrium, the mental confusion brought about by the mimetic crisis, facilitates sacrificial substitution, making it easier for members of the community to replace their mimetic rivals with the one destined to become a unanimous scapegoat. A certain drunkenness, therefore, a certain vertigo, is favorable to the success of sacrifice. This is indicated by the frequent recourse to hallucinogenic drugs and other means of reproducing the original frenzy, the perceptual havoc that facilitates sacrificial substitution. So, Girard accounts for the use of psychedelics in ritualistic settings as an intoxicating potion that favors sacrificial substitution by confusing the sacrificers, diverting attention from reality, and thus engaging in the dark dissimulation necessary for the success of sacrifice. What amazes me about this passage is the remarkable spot-on intuition that is usual of Girard, as well as its desperate incompleteness. I will give a few examples of what I mean. First of all, the Aztec use of psilocybin mushrooms in ritualistic settings was well documented by the Spanish. In the Florentine Codex, for example, psilocybin mushrooms were shown to be used extensively by the noble and priestly castes in the coronation ceremony of Montezuma. Where the Hindus used the psychedelic plant soma during their sacrificial ceremonies, here the Aztecs used the intoxicating mushrooms after the ceremony. A similar account by Friar Diego Duran notes that psilocybin mushrooms were used after sacrificial rituals, but also in the days leading up to them. In neither account are mushrooms seen to be taken during the actual sacrifice. Now, an argument can still be made that the psychedelic mushrooms are being used for an intoxicating effect to induce the procedures related to sacrifice here. But in 1995, an archaeological dig in Peru found the remarkably preserved bodies of 3 mummified teenage girls in the Ampato volcano of Peru. Evidence suggests that these girls were the victims of human sacrifices by the Incas, and when chemical analysis were undertaken, it was found that the girls had been given high amounts of coca leaves and ayahuasca in the weeks leading up to their deaths. The first hypothesis proposed for this finding is that the drugs were used to daze and dull the victims, thus making them more compliant and easier to sacrifice. This agrees with Diego Duran's account of giving psychedelics to sacrificial victims. For example, he said, they said that in order, so this is Diego Duran, a quote. They said that in order that they would not fear, that they would not dread death, they first made them drink what they called the obsidian medicine. It is said that by means of it, they deprived them, the victims, of their senses, of their consciousness, so that no longer would they be afraid at the time that they cut open their breasts. It was as if they were besotted. They lost their senses. Like a Swiss army knife, psychedelics appear to be a multi-instrument tool sacrificially. They can be used by the sacrificer, they can be used by the sacrificed, they can be used before, during, and after the sacrifice. They seem just as useful and multi-purpose in a sacrificial setting as they do in a clinical setting. What is the connection between the two? This is, I think, where things get interesting. Participants of a variety of religious denominations, ages, educational backgrounds, and so forth, consistently report the experience of encountering non-human, intelligent entities that appear to have as much, if not more, ontological fullness as anyone. In fact, participants often describe that their experience was more real than waking reality itself. I think this is one of the most compelling and unexpected findings in the scientific field since the onset of the modern age. The question is, why do people in the 21st century, in non-sacrificial settings, at least explicitly, have experiences with what people of previous times might have called gods? I don't think this necessarily throws a wrench in Girard's conception of the genesis of the gods, but it most certainly amplifies the hidden and unexplored crevices in his theory. Many of the participants of the research trials at Hopkins, for example, were atheists and materialists, as collected in extensive measures during their intake. Why did they too have a transcendental experience of other worlds populated with entities in accordance with native ontology? And if this is simply the product of hallucinatory imagination, then why do they consistently report the feeling that the experience was somehow closer to the heart of reality than their everyday lives? The remarkable capacity for psychedelic experience to convince or at least cause one to consider the depth, breadth, and utter fathomless enormity of the basic questions of existence is enervating. It causes us to think twice before applying the title theory of everything to a theory. At the very least, the psychedelic experience brings us out of our mundane, banal existence of colloquiums, grant petitioning, long traffic, and polite small talk, and opens us up to the childlike understanding that the world is far stranger and far more dazzling than any of us can ever behold over the course of a lifetime. Like the stars under which Dante travels at the end of the Cantos, the psychedelic is a reminder that though bizarre, joyful, and absolutely terrifying, the world is our home. And if it is true that we are all on a pilgrimage towards eternity, then the real connection that exists between everything proves the immense power and responsibility of humans in shaping our shared ship as we ride into the sunset. Thank you.
Please.
So you said that the Aztecs used psilocybin?
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned that there were victims and sacrificers using psilocybin. It sounds as though psilocybin was used in order to prop up the entire institution of human sacrifice. Is there some kind of concern, perhaps, that dipping into things like that, where you're coming in contact with these entities, which are, described by Duran as demons, right? And like Cortez would have called them demons. And that, this is intelligence beyond humans. Is that good intelligence?
Yes. Okay. This is an excellent question. So nobody knows. And, okay. How about this? Nobody knows, of course, the nature of these entities. But we have accounts from various people from different parts of the world and different times, it seems. So what we can say about the data we have is that there are some entities that appear to be malevolent, that do appear to be like demonic, as Duran might have said, or the Catholic conquistadors. But then there's also many entities that appear to be interested in human emotions and with the idea of progressing us in some way, at least during the experience. For example, in the account that I read at the beginning, there was that light that said, "Keep moving forward. There's more. There's more." And it was a light. It was a voice from a light. So that there's also these beneficial ones. So it's very confusing. It's actually like the archaic, kind of like the archaic gods in Jirac 7. Although Jirac talks about them having the double face of the sacred, being both. But here it seems like there really are different works. One thing that they're going to start doing soon is, so very briefly, DMT. Maybe you've heard of it. It's one of the most powerful psychedelics, and it's endogenous to the human body for unknown reasons. It's remarkable as a drug in that there is no there's no tolerance effect like other drugs. Most other drugs, you take a drug and you can't take it immediately after because your body will have created a tolerance. But DMT is not the case. So technically, you could inject DMT continuously and have a continuous experience for hours, whereas usually it's only about 10 or 15 minutes. And so they're planning on doing those studies so that people can have longer experiences in these other worlds. And maybe explore this question. There was something else I wanted to bring up about it, but I don't remember. There's maybe real quick.
Great. Like diabetes. Yeah.
Like diabetes?
Okay.
It's like yes, he's like.
Oh, actually, I'm sorry.
No. Please go ahead. Go ahead.
You mentioned that talk therapy is sort of like, sucking up resources that should be going into psychedelics. And there's a lot of talk therapy where I agree with that, but it's a lot of talk therapy like Ericksonian hypnosis and whatnot, where they like sort of secularize versions of possession and exorcism ritual, essentially. What this sounds like is that, you're kind of, I don't know if you're depending on a substance in order to experience an exorcism, essentially, right? So
yes.
You get underneath the personality, see what's foreign, but is it possible that this substance is going to delude you into thinking that maybe there are parts of you that you shouldn't let go, or maybe there are parts of you that like, oh no, that's you, but it's not? Like how much can we trust these?
Oh, well, right. Well, and by the way, I was when I first started my career with psychedelic research, I was super enthusiastic and pro psychedelic, and now I'm a little bit ambiguous about them. So I hope I didn't present I just think they're fascinating. So that's why I think they're very cool. But I'm also I'm ambiguous. Can we trust the psychedelics? In my opinion, I have to be honest, despite my ambiguity. I've seen enough cases of people have experiences where it seems like they sincerely confront with parts of themselves that they otherwise seemed incapable of doing.
Sure.
And I think that's the power in them. And I think that's a tremendous thing, a tremendous tool. So I do think that there is a possible use of these. I don't know about the whole metaphysical, the entities and all those things. I don't know what to think. And yeah, yeah.
That. So, what? But yeah, I'm sorry. I had to go for a while, but so I couldn't listen to all your talk. But just coming into the sphere here. About confronting parts of yourself that you don't confront otherwise. That do you need psychedelics for that? I mean, you can also dance yourself into a trance, or there are carnival festivities where things are allowed that are otherwise not allowed. So that there are these rituals, and of course, in many rituals they use like certain substances. That's true, but you don't really need them. I'm not sure if we need. I mean, yeah. Why would we need them? We can confront our the parts that we don't like to confront, just by being honest.
Yes, beautiful. It's not that easy to be honest.
Well said. So let's see. It's true. It's not that easy to be honest. There's a couple of directions I want to take that. One, it's true. It's true that you don't need psychedelics. It's true that there are rituals, there's dancing, there's all kinds of things. Some people say there's sexual ecstasy. I haven't experienced that yet. But there's all kinds of things that you can do that kind of elicit this transcendental thing that gives you that power and the willpower maybe, to confront these parts of yourself, to be sincere. So that's absolutely true. And the idea is that that might be the role of endogenous psychedelics. So again, the psychedelics like DMT, and there's a couple other ones that are endogenous to the human body, and a bunch of other places in life, it's unknown what their reason, what they do there. And they're remarkable in that they pass the blood-brain barrier, which is something very rare for chemicals to do. There's like a super strong barrier there, and DMT is allowed to pass through directly. Like that means that there's some important thing that it regulates, that DMT seems to regulate. So we don't know what it is. So it might be that endogenous psychedelics are released during some of these things. In any case, the things that you mentioned, they're all acts that you have to do. So it's not like we could just sit here and like, let me be honest with myself. Maybe that's possible. But a lot of times it's like, I have to do some kind of dancing or some kind of breathing technique, or I have to go meet people, or I have to do something that changes your neurobiology. And then there might be a release of the endogenous psychedelic. So a psychedelic defender, apologetic, would say, okay, well, but we found a way. We found a way to have the psychedelic experience without like looking for the experience. Also, you can use them in conjunction, which a lot of psychedelic practitioners try to do, and they say that that's far more effective.
Like psychedelics with non-psychedelic forms of ecstasy, or psychedelics with other psychedelics?
No, psychedelics with non-forms of psychedelic ecstasy. Yeah, correct. Combine the two, and the world explodes.
But
yeah, go ahead.
But there is a danger. I mean, I don't know if you know Barry Vorstenbos and Michael Elias from the Dutch Girard Society. You can find a talk by them talking about their psychosis, the psychosis that they experienced in their lives. So Barry wrote a very interesting testimonial, a philosophical approach of his experiences, of his psychotic experiences, and he defends like ritualistic practices, and he would really move away from the psychedelic things because it opens up a space where there are no boundaries, and he would need those boundaries that are provided by the ritualistic practices.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Do you have a questionnaire where you ask people that before they take psychedelics?
Oh no, there's a lengthy screening process. Yeah, okay, well, because these are Schedule 1 drugs, so the FDA is on our butts about these. Yeah. So for example, we exclude just at the beginning anyone with schizophrenia, for example, or bipolar disorder, or like these strong personality disorders, just from the get-go, because there are strange interactions with that. It seems like the extensive history of psychedelics in ancient cultures, should we say, they were always used within a ritualistic. Yeah, true. Yeah, within a ritual. They were never used outside. And so I think that's what Westerners are trying to develop. And the setting, like their ritual, is talk therapy. Yeah.
How often did ancient societies even use that? Like rites of passage, shamanism, what else?
Right. I mean, I think it varies by culture, but there's lots of evidence that it's all across the world.
Because when I read Fraser's Golden Bough, right? It's 12 books, 45 to every page. Here's a Victorian who is like very eager to point out all the flaws. But like he has an entire book on the scapegoat, right? I could not find more than maybe 2 or 3 incidents of like using psychedelics. Now he talks about it in Rites of Passage, and obviously shamanism and divination. But in terms of like how it's like it barely ever came. I'm not saying that doesn't mean it didn't exist, but it seems that he would have been the one to note like, oh, here are these savages using these psychedelics, right? I mean, is there evidence that it was like very common, or is it like once a month, once every year, or once a month? It's very common. That's not right. Like a photographer does not do with it with its night, like right. That's not ritual. Like sure. No, I think that's code. And
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah,
I don't either, but I'm just curious if you have any.
Yeah, I do know there. So there is archaeological evidence of their use in tons of different cultures around the world, but I think they were most used heavily in the Americas.
In the Americas.
Yeah, I believe, or at least that's where we have the most documentation of their use.
Is that so like within priesthoods though, or is that like in periphery of society?
From the documentation we have, we only have written of the priestly caste and the noble caste, and we're just not sure. I think of the peripheral need.
Sorry, no, please don't want that. Sorry, just please. Like there's guys on roaming, for example, they're talking about Christianity used a lot of psychedelics. Yeah. I think that for a lot of Christians, they think like, yeah, I don't use psychedelics, but my experience is very real, right? And I think that sometimes when people hear this, they react thinking like, I don't need that because I have an experience, and they think maybe sometimes they feel like this idea that early Christianity used psychedelics is sort of like trying to, what would you say, like invalidate non-induced experiences, because like those experiences are very real as well. Have you studied like the Christian context of this?
I haven't. I wanted to. Just from the outside, I find it very implausible that the early Christians used psychedelics. Although there is one scholar who wrote a book on it, and some people are convinced by it. So I haven't gotten around to it. But yeah, there are interesting similarities. Like for example, the Aztecs, apparently the word for the psilocybin mushrooms could be translated into flesh of the gods, which is very similar to the Holy Eucharist, of course. So obviously people of course, by all means, but of course, people are going to draw comparisons, and inevitably so you will draw comparisons. I mean that's very interesting. Yeah, another way of translating it is just the sacred mushroom, and so it takes on a new meaning with Girard's use of sacred. The Attenball. The what? The Attenball. Oh yeah. Right.
guy and
Well, no, so when I mentioned that some people, there is an eschatology. This guy, in the psychedelic community, there is kind of the messianic quality to the idea of psychedelics that well, they appear. I mean, psychedelics appeared on the Western Front, not including the conquistadores, but in the Western world, they appeared right around the time of the atomic bomb, like right there, like within a few years. Albert Hoffman synthesized LSD, and Gordon Wasson discovered psilocybin mushrooms, like almost at the same time. Two completely different people. It's remarkable. Right at the time that all these things are happening. So there is this feeling. A lot of people, even at actually the Johns Hopkins studies, felt that there is this reconnection with the world, and there is this desire to care for it, and a kind of return to I'm not sure, primal origins that are more in harmony with how we should be living with the earth, and so there is some kind of an eschatological flow, like a current in the psychedelic community, which is very interesting.
That was also when Indian conspiracies became like a huge sect.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
Now, for me, now the two world powers, there's no external arbiter anymore on Earth. So people are looking for some kind of external arbiter from space. There's going to be, a Pence, a Morris watchman. Yeah, but okay. I think if you want to like to have some not psychedelics, maybe some coffee or something. Great. Then we can do it.
Thank you, Archaic. Thank you, Emanuel.
Thank you.